Can you guys hear me? My name's Chris Boscolo. I'm the founder of lifeID. I'm going to talk a little bit about lifeID. I want to walk through a quick prezo and got a pretty exciting announcement at the very end of my presentation that I want to share with you. Along the way, if you have any questions, I work much better with informal, just as we go, raise your hand and I'll answer them. Before I get started, how many people in the room would consider themselves a developer? Okay. How many people would consider themselves more on the project management side of things? Okay. Investors? Awesome. So what's wrong with digital identity? I probably could ask this crowd this question and you would all immediately think of several things. Digital identity is just absolutely broken. Identity theft and fraud are costing billions. That's the first major problem, right? 16.7 million, and this is a US number, individuals affected by identity theft. $16.8 billion lost due to identity and fraud. What's interesting is 8% for online retailers, 8% of their revenue spent in fraud prevention. Kind of an interesting point on that number is 5.2% of their revenue is just spent on trying to deal with fraud. So it's not payouts due to fraud, it's just the mechanics of dealing with fraud. The problem with the system that we've built is our personal data is centralized. Equifax and every online system we use, our data is centralized. Centralized data makes honeypots for hackers. Easy targets because they are valuable targets. So one of the problems that we're fixing is this centralized storage of personal data. The other problem that businesses are faced with now is also Gdpr compliance. Up to 4% of their revenue could be fined for violating GDPR. So GDPR, as you well know, is trying to help consumers by forcing businesses to deal with our personal data in a way that we want to see it dealt with. For users, the problem is passwords. Passwords suck, we all know this. Typical user has 130 different accounts. Typical user has 27 different passwords. They typically forget their passwords weekly. 37% of them forget their passwords on a weekly basis. Most of the people in this room probably use a password manager, so I know you guys aren't in this category. Two-factor, at least SMS-based two-factor authentication. Again, I'm speaking to a crypto crowd, so I think we've all learned the lesson. You can't use SMS for your second-factor authentication. It's very easy to socially engineer the mobile providers to take somebody's phone number and use it to break into the sites they have. So passwords, big problem for users. What's interesting about onboarding for a lot of sites is in a study that we found, as users are presented with the opportunity to create a new site or a new account at a site, 50% of them tend to drop off as soon as they see that password problem. And that's, is it cognitive load? I don't know. People are just fed up with it. They just don't want to deal with the hassle of creating a new account. So the market for all of this identity problems and solution, the space that we're dealing in is a couple different areas, but very large in each one of them. And the password manager market's pretty small, but identity access management, which is dealing with all of these users and usernames and passwords, about an $8 billion market. And then when you get to the IoT side of things, that's a very large market, mostly not all related to identity, mind you, but in the IoT space, dealing with the IoT identities. A portion of that number is dealing with those identities. So the market size for the identity is huge. So lifeID. lifeID is, first of all, lifeID is a foundation. We're building a tokenized protocol and launching that as part of the foundation. Our solution puts control of digital identity back into the hands of users. And it's a new paradigm for dealing with digital identity. So lifeID is a protocol and platform. It's first of all, a tokenized open source identity protocol plus SDKs and a biometric app, reference app, mind you, because there's SDK for others to embed the technology into their app. There's a bridge layer for allowing the Web 2.0 world to use this new identity paradigm, plus the tokenized smart contract layer for storing the digital identifiers. So I'm going to, by the way, in this presentation, I'm going to delve in a little bit on the tech side. And the reason for that is because I think it's important for us to understand how we're using the blockchain and what I won't go into a lot of detail, but I just want to at least give you guys a 50,000 or 60,000 foot view of that. So for businesses, this new paradigm of taking identity data and putting it into the hands of the user, it creates a scenario where they're no longer housing a bunch of centralized data. So it's a de-risking for them. Enables faster, more trusted onboarding. We'll talk a little bit about that. I talked about the GDPR compliance. Because this is a privacy-first architecture where user data is in control of the user and they only present the bits of data they need to accomplish the business task, it makes GDPR compliance a lot easier for businesses. And because it's all cryptographically based on digital identifiers with verified credentials, very difficult to spoof those credentials, which makes fraud prevention much easier. For users, the biggest one is eliminates usernames and passwords. So for the end user, the idea of lifeID is a much better experience just logging into websites, accessing the things that we need to access on a daily basis because we're using our mobile phones that are biometric capable. And so with that is the elimination of passwords. Enhances our privacy because we're no longer handing over a truckload of personal data to the sites that we interact with. Instead, we send over just the verified credentials that are required for the business transaction that we're trying to do. And then you also replaces physical IDs in the real world with a smartphone-based version, and that typically uses a QR code to verify who you are. The other awesome thing is it's a crypto-capable digital identity. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I walk through the kind of the demo of what I'm going to show you guys. Because this is one area where it will make it much easier for businesses to onboard users in a way where they can deal with them with their crypto identity. So if they need to send them money, they already have their address to send it to. Any questions so far? Kevin?
Yeah, so you are proposing that folks use their biometric in order to secure their identification. What about, like, in the US, the fact that you can't, it's not protected by the Fifth Amendment?
What specifically?
Your biometrics, like, so you using your thumbprint, right, then enables one to be able to, search your phone, without a search warrant, right? They don't have to, like, go get a warrant to get your password to make you unlock your phone. But with the fingerprint, because it's not protected by the Fifth Amendment, you can, gain access to one's phone.
So first of all, kudos for, I don't think anybody has ever raised the Fifth Amendment issue in any of my presentations before, so kudos for that one. So that's an interesting dilemma. That at the end of the day, if you truly wanted to prevent that and you wanted to pin protect it as well, that's optionally something you can do. So if you really care about that and you don't want to have just your biometric protecting it, you could take that step. So does that answer, does it,
Well,
I don't.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's another step that you would have to do to.
Yeah, there's.
I guess the point that I'm making is that, like, you know, part of you having sovereignty
Yep.
over your information is for you to control it. And then once you use your biometrics on a device that's another corporation owns, and then that corporation is beholden to, you know, any other sovereign, it becomes less self-sovereign.
Right. So, like, I call it not the last mile, but the last inch problem. At the end of the day, absolutely, the only foolproof way is to have a piece of hardware that from the get-go was open source, right? That you controlled. That's the only way. If you're going to use an iOS device, at some point Apple is going to have the ability to squeeze between you and your data. There's not much we can do about that without building our own device. So that's a good point, and it's one of those things where I'd love to go down the path of building such a device, but that's I think a much larger endeavor. Ed, did I see your hand? Any other questions? Yeah.
Can this system erase data? Let's say I'm on the system and I'm using it, it works for me, but then I regret it.
Yep. Yeah, so great question, first of all. And let me go to the next slide now. I'm going to address that, but let me actually, I'm going to skip 2 slides, and then I'll come back to those other 2. So with this new paradigm, there are really 3 entities that are transacting in this world. There's the owner, you, the owner of your identity. There are issuers and there are verifiers. Issuers are people like your employer, your bank, the Department of Motor Vehicle. They're issuing verified credentials about you. So, for example, my employer might issue me a credential that says I'm an employee of Acme Widget Corporation. My bank might issue me a credential that says I have an account, and using zero-knowledge proof technology, might even say, give me the option to prove to somebody that that account has a balance greater than X. Verifiers are the people that care about this information. So imagine a rental agency or rental website you sign into because you want to rent an apartment in the city. They want to see proof of employment. They want to see proof of bank account over X. So you would send them those credentials, just those parts that they need to prove those aspects about you. So those verified credentials exist in 3 places potentially. You hold them all. Every verified credential, and this gets to the point of the data, is in your possession, in your smartphone's possession, and wherever you choose to back it up to. The issuer that issued that credential has a copy as well. Like obviously your employer knows you're an employee, so they have that credential that they issued you. The verifier has a copy that you send them. This is the part of the story where the laws, not technology, have to come into play to force them to either not store them or keep them for the small amount of time they need them to prove whatever bits of information they needed to prove about you. Because there's a record of those credentials having been looked at on chain, they don't necessarily need to keep the credentials themselves. So to the data erasure question, those verified credentials that you own, you can delete them all, obviously, because you own them all. To get the verifiers and issuers to delete them is still something that, like, in the case of the issuers, your employer is going to have information on you, and you don't have that. Like, you have to. That's a case where either GDPR or some other regulatory system has to come in and force them to delete that data. Does that make sense? Okay. And I haven't talked about the blockchain aspect of this, but I wanted to get to this slide because I want to make it clear that these verified credentials are really the currency, if you want to use that word, for this identity system, right? And that's the parts that has information about you. And none of those verified credentials are ever stored on the blockchain, in the public blockchain. Revocations of verified credentials can be stored, but revocations are just cryptographic keys that say that particular credential with some particular hash has been revoked. But the verified credentials themselves are never stored on the blockchain. The other thing that's stored on the blockchain I'll get to in a little bit. Any other questions before I move on? So I want to talk a little bit about our open ecosystem. So because this is a protocol and platform, we need partners to build on this protocol and platform. Many of our partners have come from the RCON ecosystem. One, Mircash up there, is building a smart safe for hotels. They're not an RCON company, but they're building an IoT device where users need to come in and interact with this device using an identity. Resure is micro insurance where you show up to a soccer field and you turn on, you actually check into the game and automatically get insurance for that game. You guys know Resonate, I'm sure by now. They're building the lifeID into the myCelia passport. I'm not sure how many in this room are familiar with that part of what Resonate is doing. And then another RCON company, Digital Town, is also using lifeID for their digital identities. And they will be using our SDKs to build their wallet. They're actually building a wallet. So the platform is an open platform. The protocol layer sits on top of the blockchain, and then we have web tools to make it easy for people to integrate identity into their current Web 2.0 systems. I want to talk a little bit about decentralized identifiers, and the reason is it kind of is the sort of the heart of self-sovereign identity as defined by the W3C. And the reason I bring this up is because there is a working group of the W3C that's standardizing what's called a decentralized identifier. With lifeID, you don't have one global identity. You have many identifiers, and you have a different identifier for each relationship that you have. So I might create an account with a bank, and I'll have an identifier that's unique with that bank. I'll create an account when I log into the RChain member website, and I'll have an identifier that's unique to that login. This identifier, the way it's constructed, is defined by the W3C. And the reason this is important is that there are other identity providers out in the world that are building self-sovereign based technology. And it is important that we interoperate. And the reason it's important we interoperate is this is a new paradigm shift for identity. And in the early days, we need businesses to adopt this model. And so what looks like a competitor to us, or to lifeID, is actually in the early days required to get this whole system of identity to switch over from the current model to a self-sovereign model. So the standards effort is really important. And don't worry too much about the syntax because I didn't see that many developer hands go up. But the important thing is this thing is under when the user creates one with the app that they're using, like the lifeID app, they generate that number, and it's really just a public key. For those of you that are transacting crypto, you know what this is. Each one of them is unique, and it's a public key that you generate for your use. And I'll talk a little bit about how it turns into getting stored on the blockchain. This is just for the geeks in the room, kind of an overview of the platform that we're building. So we have several smart contracts that make up the identity, the blockchain identity layer. The most important being the user did registry and the org did registry. And that's where I mentioned the one thing that is stored on chain is those DIDs. And the reason those DIDs are stored on chain is because the self-sovereign model is that identifier is what is used to represent you in that relationship with the other party. That identifier is what is used in those verified credentials. So when they sign that credential that says you're an employee, it's that identifier that I showed you on the last screen that they sign. Problem is, we lose our phones, things happen that cause us to potentially lose the private keys that are associated with each one of those identifiers. And that's where the magic of lifeID comes in the sense that you can configure how you want that identifier on the blockchain to be recovered if you do lose the private key. And there's a couple different ways you could configure this, your choice. One option is you could set it up so that you have one trusted entity, old world model, like a bank, that is your backup. And that identifier for that bank or whatever would be in your configuration. And when you need to recover your identifier, you would go to them and say, I need to recover my identifier, execute the smart contract with your keys that allows me to update the private key associated with my identifier. That DID I showed you on the last screen points to an object on the blockchain that has information that's important. The most important thing in that object is what is the actual public key that needs to be used to prove possession of that identifier. So that's the thing that gets updated when you do a recovery. And another recovery might be you have 5 friends, for example, maybe, and you pick 3 of the 5 to be your recovery or something like that. The third option might be for those that are really, really hardcore crypto, that the only recovery is you don't have a recovery. You have some, Ledger Nano S in your closet that is storing all of your keys. The other kind of critical components that I want to talk a little bit about is, I mentioned those verified credentials. There's a smart contract for tracking the revocations of those credentials. So an issuer can issue you, for example, a driver's license, and if they later find that you fraudulently presented them information and they need to revoke that license, they could. So they could post a revocation. And that's really important for this ecosystem to work properly, for those revocations to happen immediately, and for people, when they're checking your identity, to be able to go to the chain and make sure that the verified claim you sent is legitimate. I'm going to blaze through because we're going to run short on time. So, any questions on any of that? Yeah. Oh, good question. So, 3 major things. The lifeID platform, first of all, lifeID is a foundation, nonprofit foundation that's launching the platform. The platform is owned by the token holders. So the token holders, it's a self-sovereign platform, so at the end of the day, the token holders need to be the ones that control what is going on the platform. So the ID token does 3 important things. First of all, it pays for identity services. So when you want to create those identifiers, create organization identifiers, issue a revocation, everything that is an on-chain right obviously costs money. So that gets paid for with the token. The second thing it does is tokens are used for participation in the governance of the platform. So this is a hot topic, and I won't talk too much about it, but it's, I would say, token-assisted governance. It's not one token, one vote, but use of the platform gives more weight to the people that are tracking the people that use the platform enables giving them more weight in how the platform works. I'll leave it at that. And the most important thing, though, is that web layer that's present. You can stake tokens to get access to the web services. So think of it as a membership for using the web services. You can use the blockchain directly, and you don't need to stake to do that. But to access that web layer in that architecture diagram I showed previously, you stake tokens. And that, again, credits the user when they go to do those governance steps that I'm not going to talk too much about today. But yeah.
So you didn't like any tokens. Isn't that a big barrier to entry compared to just charging them like red tokens or whatever?
Yeah, so great question. From a user experience perspective, the user of the wallet doesn't see this. So that's a really important point. When I use the lifeID app, I don't know that there's tokens involved. That is for the verifiers and issuers to concern themselves with, basically. And their interaction is generally done through software as a service web portals that they themselves don't necessarily have to directly think about ID tokens when they interact with the platform.
So as a user, I just pay like $1 for sign up or like $5 or whatever, and then I get tokens basically and this hour and then realize I have them.
Yeah, typically it'd be the other way around, that when you sign up for a website, the website's the one that's going to pay for it.
It's a B2B service too, right? So it's the verifiers and issuers who are paying for the services to provide services to their customers.
Good question. I'm going to run out of time. So I don't think I'm going to get through the demo because I want to give Luigi time to talk about proof. So it's actually, it's not super, super important. First of all, I'm not going to do a live demo because I've done enough live demos to know that it would be much better to do a PowerPoint version. But the most important thing I want to address in walking through this is this idea that, first of all, OAuth 2 is, let me just set this up. The first way to experience lifeID is to log into a website. And OAuth 2 is a protocol that's used to log into websites. If you've ever logged in with Facebook or logged in with Google, under the hood, it's using a protocol called OAuth 2. So what we've done is we've built an OAuth 2 bridge for websites to be able to enable turning on, allowing people to come and log in with lifeID using the OAuth 2 protocol. The reason that I mention this is that one of the tools we built is for organizations to create, and this is just a skeletal tool, but let's say I'm an admin, I'll use the RCON Co-op as an example, because the RCON Co-op has a membership website that users log into. I'm an admin of that site. I want to start using lifeID to manage people that come and authenticate to the site. So the first thing I'll do is I'll download the lifeID app. We have a verified verification step for the email address that you have. And so part of downloading the app experience is you will verify your email address. That'll be the first verified credential that you have in your app, in your wallet. The next thing you'll do is you'll go to log into the website that you use to manage organizations. Now this is just a skeletal site to demonstrate it. It's not the end version that will be designed by a designer. But when you go to log in, the experience that the end user would have is they'd be presented with this QR code, and I'm not going to. So with an app, they would just scan that QR code. And, oh, I didn't configure Wi-Fi on my phone when I did that. But the first thing that the user would see when they scan that is they would see in the lifeID app the organization that they're logging into. It's really important that I mention that because one of the problems with web-based login is phishing, right? So this gives an opportunity for the software in the lifeID app to verify that the ID that's coming from this web portal is the org identifier. And it can look it up on chain and verify the public key it's using to make sure that the organization on the other side is the right organization and they're not being phished. Then I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the user can create an entry for the organization. What this is doing is creating one of those DIDs, one of those decentralized identifiers I talked about for the organization. And then they can set up the OIDC, which is this web-based protocol I was talking about. They can set that app up for the organization. At that point, I'm not going to go too much more into that, but when a user logs in using OAuth 2, the identifier they passed in was one of those DIDs. The important thing to note from that, when they do log in for the first time, they're going to create a new DID with that site. The DID that I mentioned earlier is under the control of the user. And most importantly, that DID is something that the website can use to reference that user on-chain. So if you need to pay that user for anything, if you want to make any crypto-based transaction with that user, you have the on-chain identifier that represents them. And that DID on our chain, with our version of the smart contracts, points to the wallet that that user has under their control, so you can send them money or send them crypto, excuse me, if you need to. This greatly reduces the onboarding for people coming into the crypto world. So one of the neat things about lifeID is, although the experience for the end user is reduction of passwords, or, elimination, of passwords, it's also setting the stage for entering into a world where they're transacting crypto on blockchains. So it's a stepstone for getting to that. Anyway, I'll leave it at that just for time reasons. Any questions? Can you repeat that? I'm sorry. IoT technology? So, yeah, great question. The short answer is, with these DIDs, there's authentication protocols that will be updated so that you can use them to authenticate to other things, including devices directly. So that's something that the W3C is working on, and we will support, obviously. So it's, the question really is about protocol standards, because that's what needs to happen for those devices, for you to be able to use this technology to log into those devices. Ed?
Where can we learn more about lifeID and your tokens?
Good. Man, I didn't even plant you. So first of all, I just want to say we're super excited to be building on our chain. One of the things I love is the vision for lifeID and self-sovereign identity is very much in line with the vision of our chain. And so it's awesome to be working on a blockchain that just shares that same desire to, as Greg says, reboot our coordination technologies. So what I encourage every one of you to do, because this is an open source project, is get the word out. We need people to join this revolution. We call them life idealists. If you want to be a life idealist, then join this revolution. It's going to be really fun. We are doing a token sale. Thank you for bringing that up, Ed. And we're actually going to announce it. We were going to announce it this week. Has anybody seen crypto this week? Today specifically? We're going to push to next week on the announcement for that, but I'm announcing it to you guys. So we are starting our token sale. It's actually a future token interest. If you're interested in learning more about that, please come talk to me. The most important thing I just want to point out about this is that the whole paradigm here, 45% of the tokens are for partners to build on the platform and get the ecosystem built up. You'll notice there's not a big chunk for any company that's behind, like lifeID or anything like that. lifeID is there's a Delaware Corp that we work for that is in that list of partners that will be building on this platform. But there will be other people in that list, for example, Resonate as an example of that. And Digital Town is another example of that. lifeid.io to learn more about lifeID. That's the answer to your question, Ed. Any other questions? All right, Luigi.
No worries. So I'm going to go a little bit quick here on a few things just because we're a little short on time, but just to introduce myself, my name is Luigi deMeo, I'm co-founder of Proof. And just a little background, I worked about 7 years on Wall Street at Citigroup where I met one of our own, John West. We worked together for a little bit. And basically I traded credit default swaps and equities and met my co-founder back at college. He was one of my professors. And we put the idea together of Proof about 2 years ago and conceived it and was able to work on a seed investment with Reflective Ventures. Board member Kevin Valentine, president here. And I'm just going to move a little quickly. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask, but we'll move a little brief. So I'd like to start with this slide because basically anybody who's ever heard of Proof, if they have heard of Proof, they really associate us with misinformation or fake news. But the actual platform and concept can really delve into other use cases. And so what we do at a high level is we organize a wise crowd to answer questions. So if you think of like Wikipedia, what they're really trying to do is organize a crowd to provide information, very similar for Quora. What we're trying to do instead is elicit the truth from a large amount of people. So you don't have to trust one central source. Instead, you trust a well-incentivized community. And one thing that kind of really gets misconstrued a lot of times is this idea of wisdom of crowds or collective intelligence or all these different terms that are thrown out. And there's a big distinction between mob mentality or a type of crowd that isn't wise. And these 4 points that I have up here are what is necessary for a crowd to be wise. So has anybody here ever heard of the Tulip Crisis? I'm sure you have. Okay. I like to use this example a lot, one because I'm just fascinated by it, but another reason because in history we have these bubbles and bursts over and over again. As a species, we just continue to do the same thing over and over again. And people wonder, why do markets break? Why do bubbles form? We had South Sea bubble, Tulip Crisis, the tech bubble, housing crisis, Bitcoin bubble. Yeah. So we have all these types of bubbles that continue to happen. And then the first question we usually get is, how can a crowd be wise if we continue to, essentially do the definition of insanity, the same thing over and over again? And the reason is in financial markets, or any type of real market, these conditions aren't necessary. And one of the most important ones is independence. So in the Tulip Crisis, for example, what happened was people were selling their homes to buy a tulip. How is that rational at all? It's not, right? And the reason for that is because they were just buying it to sell it higher. And that happens all the time. Just like in the housing crisis, you had people buying 4 or 5 houses, even though they couldn't even afford one, not because they, had a long-term commitment or planned to rent it out. It was simply because they thought they could flip it a few weeks or months later. And the reason I talk about this, and I like to start with this, is just to clarify that in order to have a wise crowd, it's not a financial market, it's not a prediction market, because prices elicit fear and greed rather than wisdom. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So if we can develop this type of platform that elicits the truth from people, what type of applications can we have? What type of things can be done with this? Here's just a few ideas, right? A few things we talked about was decentralized oracles, surveys, product testing. One really kind of out there idea is mock trial testing. So you get a bunch of people in a room, and when you're preparing for a trial as an attorney, how do you get them to tell you the truth, or how they would actually vote? They can tell you something, but it doesn't really mean that that's what they're really feeling. And so we're trying to create a mechanism that we can get the truth out of people. And I'll explain, kind of a little bit how that works. So I just want to segue a little bit from that opening on, how the wisdom of crowd works and why we use it into the first use case that we're going to be going after for Proof. And that's this idea of the misinformation on the internet and some of the problems and the lack of trust on the internet. So it kind of started in the 1990s when the internet was really coming about. We had this really revolutionary idea that now we can have democratization of content. And everybody would be able to have a voice, have a microphone, be able to essentially be their own journalist, be their own publisher. And that happened, and there were some side effects. And I think we're all seeing those now. And here's just a few of them on the right. We have ad-based journalism, where people are essentially writing and selling advertisements to monetize the content. Or there are social media platforms, and they're trying to monetize the content in that way. Now you have misinformation, echo chambers. All these types of things are side effects of everybody having a voice. And so what are the existing solutions to kind of solve this problem? And this isn't just a misinformation problem. This is also a rating, evaluation type of problem. So if you look at this really simple graph, it's just scalability versus accuracy. And on the bottom right, you see things such as Yelp and Reddit. They're scalable platforms because they have this type of shared economy where everybody can vote, rate, those type of things. On the left-hand side, you have kind of boots-on-the-ground type organizations. Snopes, PolitiFact, FactCheck, Consumer Reports. These are the type of platforms where they need to actually hire people in order to, every person that they add is like a diminishing marginal utility type of thing. There's only a certain amount that they can actually do. So they're not scalable, but they're more accurate. So we have this problem where we can't get anything that's scalable and accurate. And that's what we're trying to build at Proof. Scalable, accurate, verifiable tool. So, yeah, and just to really make it clear, you have this democratized content creation. Proof is aiming to be democratized quality control on the internet. It's one of the only industries that doesn't have any type of mechanism to filter through things. There's ways to filter through music, there's ways to filter through art, but in journalism, there's really no way to filter through anything. You have these fact-checking services, but they're not scalable at all. This is a very early version of our platform and what it would look like. And so basically what we're trying to provide is the ability for users to have some sort of filter on the internet. Is CNN mostly true or mostly false? Is CNN more true than Washington Post? Is the New York Times trending as mostly true the last 3 years versus the last 5 years? Are they trending in the right direction? I really care about the New York Jets. They'll probably suck this year, but that's okay. But I want to know who will write about it. Should I look up this author or should I look up that author? Wouldn't it be great to have this type of thing on the internet where you have this platform that can give you an idea of where should I look, where should I read, who should I read from? And that's kind of what we're trying to get at. So it's a little bit of transparency for people. And so how do we do this, essentially, is a good question. How do we get this great filtering concept on the internet? And that's really by voting. And that's where the wisdom of the crowds comes back in. So essentially, this is a really simple mock-up of what a vote would look like. And what you don't see here is moving prices. What you don't see here is odds. What you don't see here is your potential return. You don't see when the vote's going to close. You don't see how many people voted in one direction versus other people. The idea is that if you can submit a blind, independent vote based on your research of what you think about the content, based on the academic research that we've actually conducted with our economic team, we can elicit the truth out of you. So you come in, you read this article, you make a decision of whether or not it's mostly true or false. You also identify whether or not it's an opinion piece, and then you submit your wager. How much or how sure are you? And that's going to be identified by tokens. So the vote will be easy to conduct, and it won't elicit any of the problems with prediction markets. So that's just how a vote works. But what's important, I should actually mention, is once this vote is submitted, it comes into our platform, and I'm not going to get into the technology. I don't think I have time today. But there's a vote tallying algorithm that we've created with our economic team. And once that algorithm has determined that the parameters necessary for a wise crowd are there, it closes the vote. The vote won't close until those conditions are necessary. So a lot of the questions we typically get are, yeah, but isn't this just like a majority wins type thing? We have a lot of things that we have in the background that I'm not sure I have time to get into, but prevent those type of things. So why do we have a token? And that's my favorite question to ask other people, so I should answer it myself. And there's a few reasons. When you're conducting voting online, it's really important that any type of malicious actors can, if they try to attack the system, will be holding the actual asset that they're trying to steal. So let's say somebody comes in and they wants to buy a vote. They need to buy proof tokens first, driving up the price. And then once that happens, once the vote closes, let's say they want to sell it. Well, they're selling the asset that they just bought, so they really can't really liquidate it and make any money. Whereas if it was in dollars and they bought the vote, they walk away with a handful of dollars and they can use that, spend it. Same thing with Bitcoin or Ether. So the question is always, why not just use the protocol coins such as Ether, Bitcoin, things like that? The reason is because if you do that, then it's really easy to attack things, attack systems. And one thing that's a little bit different on our token versus others is we're creating a token that will have ownership of the platform. This is not a utility token. It has utility, but it's not just the utility token. So owners of the token will participate in voting, they will participate in governance, they will also own ownership of the platform, ownership of profits, ownership of all these types of things. And we'll be submitting exemptions from the SEC in order to do any type of token sales. So, and then, why the blockchain? Why do we need this blockchain at all? Why do we need our chain? Why are we here? And there's two really important reasons. One is auditability. The second one I have up there. We're trying to create a vote that once the vote is complete, you can self-audit whether or not your vote was included. You don't have to trust proof. You don't have to trust our technology. All you need to do is go there and be able to see that your vote was included in a way that is actually quite complicated to do from a technical perspective, but can use things such as zero-knowledge proofs and things of that nature. And the other reason is immutability. One of the technical challenges of our platform is that all of the content that comes into us is exogenous, meaning that we can't control what people do with links. So, we can have an author who writes an article that is blatantly false. We identify it as false. It's got a tag as false, and they change the content afterwards, even though it still is a tag. Having an immutable timestamp allows us to identify what we said at that time and be able to update it. And that's very different than having to trust our server that we said something, which we didn't. So this is a really simple breakdown of the roadmap, when it was conceived. We have crowdfunding going live in September. We'll have a Reg A Plus token sale going live, and we'll be releasing a beta platform in April, but we plan to release our alpha in December, which won't involve tokens, but it'll provide users the ability to try and understand how the technology works, what it's like to be a voter on this platform. The other thing is we released a little bit of a game that we'll be conducting a tournament shortly, and the game is called LIT, light version of proof, where people can vote on facts, trivia, article facts, things of that nature, and kind of learn what it's like to become a proof voter. And we'll actually be conducting a recruitment process of voters for our platform. This platform won't work if we can't recruit voters, and that's really important to know. So that's going to be something that we push really hard. A little bit about the team that we have. Some people are here, some people are not on this screen. Paulo's in the room right there. But we have Dr. Chris Young as the co-founder. He's not able to be here, but he's actually a little bit the brains behind some of the economics behind this platform. He's a professor of business ethics over at Rutgers. Michelle Leopard is our marketing director, and then we have two of our lead developers. You'll see them walking around, one with green hair. And this is just a little bit of the progress to date, but I'd like to stop and see if anybody has any questions. I went through a lot and I didn't explain a lot, so is there any questions? Yeah, sure.
How your model would be compared to Augur, for example?
Yeah.
And is it not at all alike, or is there some overlap?
Yeah, there's big distinctions, actually. It's a good question. So Augur has this kind of dual token model where they use reputation as one of the dominant factors in trying to elicit the truth from people. And they also have, it's essentially a prediction market, so the price moves. In our opinion, based on our research, that's something that's not going to elicit the truth, but it's going to elicit gambling. And the big difference is when you vote on proof, you don't know how Paolo voted. You don't know how Chris voted. You don't know what the current score is. You're not sure of any of these type of things until the vote closes, which is done by the algorithm. So that's a big distinction, and it's something that I'm pretty sure that people won't be able to understand until they actually see it live, because it's hard to wrap your head around. But it's what all the academic research suggests.
Is there anything similar to proof on Ethereum today?
No. Really, everybody in crypto kind of avoids this idea of independent blind voting. They prefer much this market-based infrastructure. Sure.
Yeah, so maybe to clarify Ed's question, so there's no disincentive for a voter to say something is true, even if it's fake news or...
No, I skipped over the most important part. So once the voting is closed, there's a payout that's exchanged. The payout is between the two sides, the minority and the majority. So the disincentive is probably one of the most important parts of the proof platform. And it's why Yelp and Reddit and those type of platforms really struggle to be accurate, because there is no disincentive. You could just click like up, like down anytime you want. Over here, there's actually a disincentive. You can lose money if you're not in the majority. And it's not a simple majority, because there are about 7 parameters in the algorithm that are necessary for the vote to close. So until those 7 close, it's up for grabs, but once they do, then there's a payment that occurs. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Yeah, sure.
So what you're doing is Augur with blind voting and a different majority algorithm.
Say that again?
What you're doing is basically Augur, but with a different algorithm for determining what the truth is, and blind voting so you don't see the payout when you vote.
Yeah, it's blind. That's a big difference. There's no moving price. That's a big difference. And there's no reputation. That's a big difference, right? Our voters are anonymous, and that's actually really important, because if somebody wants to attack the system, they could just call up all the voters and be like, hey, I'll pay you $5 each, you vote this way. You can't do that here. They don't know who the voters are.
How are the results communicated?
I'm sorry?
The results of the voting. You vote on, I don't know what you vote on persons?
Articles.
So, let's say an article is completely false.
Yep.
How is this
Communicated, sure. First, it'll be pushed on our website. On the back end, what's really happening is we're publishing a proof to our chain, which essentially proves all the votes that came into our server, our platform, and proves that each person who voted was the person who voted, and they voted that amount. So it's actual mathematical proof that proves that this happened at this time with this timestamp.
So is there any way of combining your system with his ID system? So
Yeah, this conversation's ongoing.
you can have this author of the article simply doomed forever?
Yeah, that's one part. The other part is all of our voters need to pass an identity verification. It's not really for any legal purposes. There's no KYC AML necessary. What it's necessary for is to stop civil attacks. That's another thing that a lot of blockchain platforms really fail with. Anytime you have online voting without identity verification, there's a lot of types of attacks that can't be prevented. So, yeah, you can have users creating multiple accounts and things of that nature. The other thing I didn't get time to touch on is we're using this concept of quadratic voting. I'm not sure if anybody has heard of it, but it's this sense that if you want to vote 2 tokens, it costs you 4. If you want to vote 4 tokens, it costs you 16. And you get some really nice properties when you do this. It makes it very difficult for a majority with weak preferences to win. So it's not a simple majority, It's a majority with strong preferences, meaning that they really care.
How do you separate so-called facts from
Say that again?
opinion?
Say that again?
Opinion and facts.
Yeah, so we have, in the voting, we ask people to identify whether or not it's an opinion piece or an article piece. And what we ask our voters, we'll be writing up sort of constitution to be able to have them follow some certain guidelines when they vote. And they won't be voting on individual facts initially, they'll be voting on the article as a whole. And this will give us a really nice ability to identify what's blatantly false. Probably won't give us a great ability to identify the gray. And what we're planning are subsequent products where we can do line-by-line voting and things of that nature. So that's a good question. Yeah, sure.
How are you thinking about protecting yourself from kind of Russian-style troll factories? So people, like companies prepare to have huge investments, so they will invest really quick.
Yeah, sure. I think you're asking if they want to buy the vote? Yeah, so that's really what we spent the last, 4 or 5 months working on. How do we make this vote pretty complicated to buy? And just to give you an idea, we'll be releasing an economic white paper in about 3 weeks, which will give you an idea of all the work we've done. But essentially, there's a few parameters for a vote to close. There's a number of voters necessary. There's a distribution of the voters, not any race, gender, or anything like that, just distribution of the number of voters, and also volatility of the score. So that really, that volatility that we've simulated really makes it difficult for somebody to come in, push the vote up, or push it in later. It won't close in that type of scenario. The other thing is with quadratic voting, it's extremely expensive to buy a vote because, if you want to buy 2 tokens, it costs 4. That's a really small number. As that gets larger, it grows exponentially. So it makes it really difficult. We've simulated this numerous times. So, and also you need to pass an identity verification as a Russian troll.
So you want to prevent civil attacks through the
Identity, yeah. Not sure any other way to do it.
So I can't just have multiple accounts to me. I have to buy people, make accounts.
You would have to pay people to essentially sign up for the platform, buy tokens. Yeah, you mean that you could pay people to buy the votes? Say that again? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, you're saying that it's not a lot of money to them, so why not just do it? Yeah, sure. There's a few things there. They can lose quite a bit of money if they haven't structured this carefully. If you want to buy a vote, number one, you need to know the voters. So you need to get people to sign up first. Otherwise, it's just you, right? Like let's say there's 100 voters on the platform, and you want to buy another 50 to sign up that day. Well, you need to make sure, you need to be quite sure that you're not going to outvote the other 100 voters. And the other thing is with quadratic voting, each voter doesn't really contribute that much because it's exponentially squared. Does that make sense? Because the marginal cost of the vote grows exponentially, it's quite difficult to buy a vote. Whereas if it was a simple majority and you each bought 100 tokens, it'd be very difficult for the other people to beat you.
Your system requires manual labor to
Yes.
work, so it will be a bit more profitable for people in poorer countries to work the system compared to, let's say, US or Europe.
When you say profitable,
If they make the same amount of money, it will be worth more in Bangladesh compared to Norway.
oh sure, yeah. That's assuming that the payout is the same on articles in Bangladesh and that they are in the US.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking if this could have any interesting side effects.
Yeah. You would definitely have more people in those countries trying to play. But in the beginning, we're just rolling out in the United States. Although I do think that this platform probably is more useful in other countries than the United States. But we're rolling it out in that direction initially. I think I saw a hand in the back. Nope.
Will you, so there are all these kinds of attacks one can imagine. They might be offensive, they might not. Ultimately, it's really admirable that you go over independence because that's a piece that most of these games don't have, but still is some game. And you can't actually call people because you don't know who they are. You can have networks of people who participate and publish. Let's all vote this way, let's all vote that.
Yep.
Are you going to do anything about, say, sort of meta evaluations where
What type of evaluation?
meta evaluations where after a vote goes one way or another, you or the community or someone decides whether or not
Yeah,
that's a good vote or a bad vote and that's people?
it's a great point. It's something that we're debating immensely internally, and it's really this idea of an appeal of a vote, just like you have in Congress or something of that nature, where we voted this direction, we believe this is it, or everybody on the platform realizes that some sort of attack happened. How can we reverse that in a community-driven way, not by proof trying to take off the content? So that's something that we're working hard on. That's actually quite complicated to figure out, but it's something that we do plan to do in the future. You need some sort of reverse mechanism somehow. So yeah, that's a great point, definitely. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. What's that?